If you had to start an e-commerce business, what would have to be true? And it goes to this idea of like, I would want to be able to very clearly state my unique value proposition to the world and my unique leverage on the market. And so we think about four-quarter accounting and we talk about, okay, do I have CAC leverage? That usually comes in the form of I have access to organic audience. I have some mechanism to drive non-paid advertising success at a scale that like helps me minimize the amount of marketing costs I have. Do I have margin leverage on the cost of goods? Maybe I have some unique relationship with the manufacturer. I have ability to monopolize a supply chain.
This episode of the e-commerce playbook is brought to you by Mercury. Here at Common Thread Collective, we know that cash flow is everything, especially right now. That's why we always recommend that our clients use Mercury to manage their banking, capital, and cards all from one place. Mercury lets you receive funds, generate invoices, and send free international and domestic wires in US dollars. Mercury also gives you instant access to virtual credit cards and 1.5% cash back across all your spend. Plus, if you need inventory or advertising, try Mercury's founder-friendly capital. Mercury brings all the ways you use money into one product that feels extraordinary to use. Deposit $5,000 or spend $5,000 using your Mercury credit card within your first 90 days to earn $250, or do both for $500 in total rewards. Just go to mercury.com/CTC to give it a try with no minimum deposits. That's mercury.com/CTC. Mercury is a technology company, not a bank. Check show notes for details. Hey folks, welcome to the e-commerce playbook podcast. I'm your host, Richard Gaffin, Director of Digital Product Strategy here at Common Thread Collective. Coming to you from a brand new environment here. This is our new apartment we just moved. And I'm joined, as I always am, by Taylor, our CEO. And I was wondering what the bigger change is here, my background or your sort of mustache setup that you have here. So you want to kind of walk us through the thought process there?
The Costa Mesa Yankees have reached the playoffs, Richard.
Oh my God.
And
wow.
2 games before the playoffs started, we were on a bit of a losing streak. And and suddenly I looked in the dugout at the start of our game and our kids had taken the eye black and started drawing mustaches on themselves, as kids are known to do. And so since they started doing that, we haven't lost. And so
Wow.
I had to join the mustachio magic of the Costa Mesa Yankees as the playoffs started. And we have rolled on and we are now in the championship next Tuesday. So I can't shave my mustache till
That's
at least next Tuesday, much to the chagrin of my wife and many people around me.
Okay. So, well, we hope to see this mustache next Monday then, because that will indicate that y'all are still in it. But
Well, no, we play next Tuesday. So
you play next
if we win, we get to go on to the Tournament of Champions. So yeah, next Wednesday will be the real test of whether it exists or not.
Okay, great. All right. Well, so this is actually, honestly, a perfect segue into our topic today, because you're talking about growing a mustache and that causing a team to win. And since we're talking about superstitions here, let's go into a conversation that you were having on Twitter the other day. So, well, I guess this goes all the way back to the account Life of Buy, who had tweeted out that fully 50% of e-commerce businesses are worth $0. And you had replied to that saying it's closer to 95%. And of course, that ignited the usual conversation that it does. And anyway, it's part of the reason that I kind of made the segue that I did is that if 95% of e-commerce businesses are worth $0, and this is ultimately feels like sort of a delusional or dare I say superstitious task, despite the fact that we like to think of it in terms of logic and data and all those types of things. So talk me through kind of what you're thinking in terms of this reply and kind of set up the rest of the context for us.
Yeah, I'm going to do my best to walk a tightrope here between being like perpetually cynical, which I don't actually think is that helpful or useful in a position, to understanding what I think I've discovered about great entrepreneurs. So let's start with just this baseline idea about startup success. We're going to start broader than even e-commerce. So I pulled some ChatGPT numbers for us just to level set the expectation of what I'm talking about. So of startups, so this is data primarily pulled from SBA, which is Small Business Association, of startups that survive 5 years. Okay, so just forget whether you ever make money, whether you're worth anything. What percentage of companies do you think that start up, new companies, make it 5 years?
I'm going to say, let me go 7%.
Well, no, 45%. Okay, about half survive 5 years.
Sure.
Okay, that's a very low bar. Just
Sure.
Can make it. What percent do you think reach $1 million in revenue?
Okay. So 45 of the baseline, let's say 20.
between 4 and 9% ever make it to $1 million in revenue. Okay, so think about how small that is. So when I say 95% are worth zero, these same ideas apply in e-commerce, right? Like e-commerce, the vast majority of businesses are somebody that's registered a Shopify store and tried to sell a few widgets that somebody created. Okay, now what percent do you think reached $10 million in revenue?
Let's say 1%.
Okay, yeah, between 0.5% and 1%. And the businesses that produce $1 million in net profit. Okay, so now we've moved from $10 million to $1 million in net profit. It is 0.1%. Okay, like that is a remarkably grim benchmark of creating a startup as a mechanism for success, right? So only about 70,000 C Corp returns reported more than $1 million in net income out of 6.7 million active corporate returners. But most of those companies are decade old, not startups. So you adjust for age and it pulls it down well below 0.5%. Okay. So this is just an important level set that starting a business is the odds are stacked against you in almost every industry, and e-commerce is not immune to that. And this is where I think it's like my response was as much about that data as it was anything to do with specifically e-commerce. Now, I also believe that there is a compounding set of complexities in making an e-commerce business really valuable. I actually think it has a beautifully low barrier to entry to start. And I bet it has a higher success rate than these numbers in terms of reaching $1 million in revenue, as an example. I bet you could see a higher percentage get there. But in terms of making it worth money, something somebody would purchase from you, it is a wildly difficult endeavor because, and I think this has been well documented, there's such a giant cascade of negative results for people who have entered into the buying process so far in our industry. So I think that there's a combination of what is the general reality of starting a business, and then what are the complexities for e-commerce generally.
Okay, so the flavor of a lot of the reactions to this particular tweet was this sort of like idea of like, why do we do this? Why? One person said, like, why do you think so many play the D2C game when there's scarce exit and cash opportunities? Sure, the top 5% kill it, but those are unicorns. Why not just go the agency route? Genuinely curious.
Well, because people aren't making logical decisions, right?
Of course.
Because here's the key. Like, I think the EV of, let's say, going to be a meta rep, which most of the entrepreneurs here in our industry, a lot of them would be qualified to go and get a job like that, where you're talking about a baseline of making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, plus some stock options on a stock that's one of the best performing in the history of the world. Like the EV on going to take an employment role at one of these companies, Meta, Shopify, Google, Klaviyo, Affirm, whatever, is so much higher than being an entrepreneur. That is just a baseline fact. And then the agency thing, I think, is even like below that. This tier of just being an employee at a high value company is easily the highest floor action that you could take as a person trying to establish life. But what I think is really important to understand is what entrepreneurs are actually after is not the highest EV decision profile. That is not the governing mechanism for how entrepreneurs make a decision. And thank the Lord that they don't, because otherwise we would never reshape the world, overcome dramatic odds, and do things that are amazing. And so I think sometimes it's really important to understand, why do entrepreneurs behave the way that they do? And why is that profile of person actually really important amidst the society? And I think that it's not logic. That's not the motivating factor.
Yeah. Well, okay, so let's dig a little bit more into maybe the specifics of what those motivating factors are. Like, why, in your estimation, why is it that most people involved in this do what they do?
I think there are a number of factors. And amongst the entrepreneurs that I've gotten to know and spend a lot of time with, and even reflecting on it for myself, there are a few things. There's autonomy. There's this desire to control your life, to feel a sense of it's on me. I'm going to try and make or fail on my own terms. And there's, I think, especially built into the ethos of the United States of America, a culture of this, that is this sort of libertarian, I'm going to make it on my own thing that is woven into the fabric of our culture and celebrated. We look out, and the heroes of the business world are these folks. And so I think there's very much a cultural underpinning that a lot of us were brought up in to ascribe to that kind of ideology. The second is that you have a lot of these people are visionary in the sense that they have some problem or experience that they've had, and they want to change it. The world needs to exist differently than it is today. And there's this burning thing inside of them that it just must be so. And so it doesn't, all the logic sort of peels away, and this need to resolve this feeling or conflict or issue for themselves sort of supersedes everything else that they've experienced. And they get latched on to a sense of the future that they must then bring forth into reality. And so that's like this other big piece of it. And then they're gamblers, they're high upside chasers. They don't settle for the floor, where we can agree that working at Meta might be a higher floor, but it probably means you'll never make $100 million. Now, maybe Meta's a big bad example because there's a lot of good stock options over there, but the idea of being an employee somewhere probably caps your earning, and people like the lottery event of it. They like the and their perception of the likelihood that they will themselves achieve it is much higher because they apply an individual sense of skill or expectation or community to what they're doing in a way that it's better. So I think they're gamblers, they're visionaries, and they was the first things. Oh, they value autonomy and independence in their life and decision making.
Trusted by more than 200,000 startups, small businesses, and e-commerce companies, plus many of our clients here at CTC, Mercury gives you the ability to manage your banking, capital, and cards all from one place. E-commerce Playbook podcast listeners get $250 by depositing $5,000 or spending $5,000 using the Mercury credit card within your first 90 days, or do both for $500 at mercury.com/CTC. Mercury is a technology company, not a bank. Check show notes for details. Yeah. And I think what you're describing is overall, it's just sort of the entrepreneurial personality type. And I think one thing that we kind of talked a little bit about before we hit record here was that it is sort of fundamentally delusional, and that's not necessarily a bad thing in any given, in any field where success is sort of, there's such a low rate of success. So like, let's say being a stand-up comedian or making it in music or whatever, every single one of those people is delusional. David Bowie is just as delusional as the busker on the corner of the street. It's just one happened to make it, the other didn't.
That's right.
And this seems like a similar scenario, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Is that there are lots of things that we do where the decision isn't this like purely mathematical, logical calculation of the most likely thing to occur. And otherwise, there's probably lots of weird things that we would never do, under that pretense. And so I think for humans, there's something about the great endeavor, the attempt to overcome odds, it's very human in that, like, I think this is a distinction maybe between a machine that would be programmed to behave consistently logically and something that sort of is motivated by different desires and wants maybe that are very, very uniquely us. And so I think this is actually where entrepreneurs should, in many ways, my point of talking about all this is that they should block out the tweet thread. Is that don't engage that content. It's one thing if you're like trying to sell your business and you're looking for a market assessment of the price that you could expect today. And that's like, then it's worth understanding this context. Otherwise, I'd ignore it entirely because that's not why you got here in the first place. Don't confuse the idea that you started an e-commerce business because you did some market assessment of the viability of the industry for producing long-term exits. That's not why anybody got here, at least nobody that I know.
Yeah, I think it's like the advice to get off Twitter, I think like makes a lot of sense in the sense of like the internet, generally speaking, amplifies edge cases just in all sorts of, in every kind of facet of life, and in entrepreneurship, no less. So I think that there's a lot of, and you've talked about this, a lot of people, you look on social media, say, this brand had this exit, they did this thing, they employed this tactic, and it, kind of blew them up, whatever. And that kind of being noise or just like useless data points, essentially, that just kind of like continue to create this sort of like this cycle in your head that's illogical, essentially, right?
That's right. And for me, like the takeaway here and why people listening is that, and even when I think about this as a person running an agency who's seeking out brands to partner with, is that it is forever true that the best partners we have are in some ways the most delusional and obsessed with the world they're trying to craft. Right. And I think a great example, I've mentioned on a bunch of podcasts, is Josh Shapiro from Baseball Lifestyle running an Instagram account for 10 years, posting 10 times a day before he ever sold a thing. Like, there's nothing about that behavior that is like a logical pathway to making money. But what it actually builds is a moat. It's the behavioral thing that no one else will do that creates the edge over everyone else that will then try to compete with you because you were so willing to behave illogically for so long that you actually offset it. I saw a great quote. So Alex Hormozy was on some podcast the other day, and the guy asked a question, which was like, if you could toss out every tweet you've ever written, every book you've ever written, and you were going to die and you had to leave the world with one sentence, what would it be? Which I thought was, like a pretty deep question. And he stops for a second and he gathers. He's like, figure out what it is that you truly want, and then do so much volume in pursuit of that thing that failing would be unreasonable. And so what I think about these odds is that what they don't sort of share is they don't account for your input into trying to make it work. Right. And so not everybody tries the same amount. Not everybody efforts the same amount. And so you can really reshape the likelihood of success by the amount of effort and volume that you put forward. And so I think that's where there are people that have lots and lots of successes, is because they actually have created for themselves an edge over everyone else by their unreasonable efforts that create a much higher likelihood of success. And so it's the people that can sort of look into that environment and go, yes, I recognize why is because most people won't do X, Y, Z, A, B, C, but I'm actually willing to, and therefore I have a much more disproportionate likelihood of success than everybody else.
Yeah, I have another Hormozy quote that I think applies to this is a really good one. He says, one thing you have to accept is that every business idea is a bad idea, except some of them happen to be good. And there's a little bit of luck of the draw in terms of what is and isn't good. But I think it would be interesting to kind of pull on that thread a little bit more of like, what are the characteristics that distinguish the 5%? Obviously, there's a little bit of luck and a lot of effort, but are there any sort of like fundamental characteristics of certain businesses that make them more likely to succeed? Or like what other factors play a role there?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And I think it gets into sort of the concept of like the business vehicle you choose to try and drive. There are some that are better suited for success than others. And I think there is wisdom that you can glean in terms of what is this market that I'm entering? And this goes back to this question of like, for me, okay, Taylor, if you had to start an e-commerce business, what would have to be true? And it goes this idea of like, I would want to be able to very clearly state my unique value proposition to the world and my unique leverage on the market. And so we think about 4-quarter accounting and we talk about, okay, do I have CAC leverage? That usually comes in the form of I have access to organic audience. I have some mechanism to drive non-paid advertising success at a scale that like helps me minimize the amount of marketing costs I have. Do I have margin leverage on the cost of goods? Maybe I have some unique relationship with the manufacturer. I have ability to monopolize a supply chain. I think about Heart and Soil. I use that example a lot. I have massive gross margin, but not even just massive gross margin. Generally, gross margin leverage to the rest of the market for some reason. I have a patent. There's something on that side of things. Operating leverage. I'm really great at AI. And so I'm able to get systems put in place. Like I think there's companies right now that are, being able to create OpEx leverage where I think another one is like, I'm willing to work remote and don't need to create these ancillary expenses. My life is really cheap. I don't need to pay myself a lot of money. These are all sort of lifestyle advantages in the short term that many entrepreneurs leverage early on. So I would need to look out at the opportunity and go, there is something about the thing that I'm doing that provides me unique leverage on the world. Like when I think, and one of the ways you could create this, I think about this with CTC, is that my unique leverage on every other agency is actually 10 years of vested network creation. Because one of the things that happens for us over the course of 10 years is you get throughout every month in an unpredictable and hard to understand way, people referring us business. And it's just the end node of an end node of an end node of an end node of an end node of a system that has existed for 10 years where people have come into its sphere, had positive experiences, whether it's former employees that now work at brands, whether it's other brand leaders who have gone on to other brands, whether it's friends of brands or friends of people, or like just 10 years of existing in this space means that you develop this system that constantly pushes back towards you that like you couldn't recreate tomorrow. You just wouldn't have that leverage on me. So there's these things that take time to build and you can effort towards. The audience that I've developed takes a long time to build. Like these are all moments that you could create that I think if you were to go into a thing, you'd have to understand what is that unique value proposition. And a lot of times when I talk to entrepreneurs, I think it's like, you have to answer this question. If you can't answer it, and if you suggest an answer and it's kind of squishy, you find someone in your life who will give you an honest assessment of how uniquely valuable that is, and show how it's, and present how it's going to show up on your P&L. And if not, I do think it is worth trying to redesign your business towards such an end, because it is so hard to make it being very average and mediocre across all of those categories. It likely produces average or mediocre returns over time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was going to say, like, this is maybe a good place to plug our diagnostic toolkit product, because that's the function.
Yeah, it's a
of
bit
that
of a
tool.
mirror. Yeah.
Yeah. The function of that tool is to, yeah, exactly, hold up a mirror to your business, or like a way to do it or think about it is like a 23andMe test for your business. Like, what is the sort of fundamental DNA of this brand, given the product, given just sort of the way the business is set up, whatever. Like, what are the things that you are kind of out of your control in terms of what the business is, and then what things can you change? And yeah, I don't think like the answer, if you have like a low growth potential business, that's not going to stop you from doing what you're doing, but it's at least important to understand that that is the reality that you're working with.
That's right.
And then to kind of go from there.
And I think that like, sometimes I design, like, in creative, I'll design this like 2x2 matrix to have a conversation with somebody, which is, if product is like an x-axis and the advertising is the y-axis, and let's say that the spectrums are from like amazing, unique, and novel to total commodity, right? If your product is a total commodity, if you're selling batteries, if you're selling deodorant, if you're selling toothpaste, like, in order to win in a highly commoditized category, your advertising has to be exceptional. Like, you have to do something that cuts through the noise so dramatically to gain awareness and market share. And so this sort of spectrum exists. You could apply that same logic along all the attributes of a business. Is your gross margin exceptional? No. Well, then your marketing better be world-class, because you need to drive really efficient acquisition, right? So as you think about the business, you can start to understand where you need to behave like further out on the risk curve, and where you can behave more normal, right? And so if you have like amazing gross margin, well, then you don't need to have the best CAC in the world. So your advertising needs to be good, consistent, but doesn't have to be exceptional in order to win the game. But if you look at your gross margin and it's mediocre, and you've got a high return rate on your product, and you look at, your OpEx and it's kind of just normal, well, then your marketing needs to be disproportionately effective. So you better put some time into thinking, how are we going to be unique? And we got to take bigger swings and wilder behavior here, because we have to be disproportionately better. So I just think that kind of thinking really helps you understand where you need to behave more dramatically than other people.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I think like maybe a good analogy for this is that an ecom business is not much less like a slot machine than it is like poker or something like that, where the odds of winning there's still a lot of luck involved, but there's definitely a skill level that can give you a higher chance of success. So even if fundamentally you are going in for a delusional reason, quote unquote, there are certain sort of skills that you can work on. There's certain things that you can bring into the running of your business that actually raise your odds and gives you just a higher likelihood of being in that top 5%, right?
Yeah, that's right. And then like, even this goes back to the Ecommerce thing, and like getting really clear on, are you trying to make $100,000? Are you trying to make $1 million? Or are you trying to make $100 million? Because your behavior is going to be very different in every one of those scenarios, and it's going to force you into more extreme versions of each outcome. Andrew Udarian from ECF shared the other day, like, his investment portfolio, and he was talking about how that specific investment portfolio matches to his desired ambition, right? And it ended up being like mostly investing in index funds, right? Was the end conclusion of which. I hear this advice a lot, which is like awesome. Like, but if your ambition, and there's no right or wrong, is to, buy the New York Jets and your Gary V one time, like, then investing in index fund is a terrible idea. It will never get you there. You cannot 8% compound your way to $1 billion, like, unless you have some massive baseline of influx of cash to be putting into that. So you're going to have to take that money and put it further out onto the risk curve to try and generate disproportionate returns at a level that's different, right? And so I think as entrepreneurs, we have to think about our businesses the same way, which is like, can you 8% grow your way to the desired return that you want? If so, well, then awesome, plug along, risk mitigate, think about diversifying and reducing any risk of ruin that you can, and take really slow, moderate growth for the next 20 years and off you go if that's satisfying to you. But what I see is often a mismatch between the desired return of the shareholders and the behavior of the organization, such
Hmm.
that there's actually no pathway to ever achieving the outcome that they desire. And there's a lot of episodes we have back in the day
Hmm.
about the alignment of desire with behavior in terms of inside of a business structure. And I think these stats are just another opportunity to revisit that and say, like, well, okay, is your goal to be around in 5 years? Well, there's a 50% likelihood of that actually. So let's see how we could get that to 70%. What would need to be true if that's your goal? Is your
Hmm.
goal to get to $1 million in net profit? Well, that's a 0.1% endeavor. Are you clear on that? Okay, cool. In light of that, how do we get that from 0.1% to 4%, which would be a monumental increase of the likelihood of success, but still means you're going to fail 96% of the time. So are we conscious of this? Is this what you want to spend your life doing? Great. Let's go after it. And we're here to help.
Yeah. Okay. So out of curiosity, where do you see the biggest misalignment between goal and behavior? So my sense would be it's like the goal is to, I don't know, whatever, become billionaires in 5 years. And then the behavior is more a slow build. But like how does that usually
I,
shake
th-
out?
I think I think that what people really want is, if they take a step back, they want personal wealth, financial
Mhm.
freedom
Yeah.
out of their entity. And I appreciate Sean from Ridge is really going hard on this right now. He's like putting out a lot of content about running to your first $1 million. Like, get out of the business into your pocket. And I think entrepreneurs way too often just double down, double down, double down. The cash just goes back into the business, go back into the business, and they don't actually think about, okay, my goal is to get myself $5 million liquid in my own bank account, because there's this like really tempting delusional bet, which is that, like, oh, my businesses grew 20% last year. So the best place for my capital is inside of the 20% annual growth thing, because if I put it into the stock market, that's 8%. But there's like a huge punitive value to the illiquidity of your stock. Like,
Mhm.
people just don't take into account of how hard it is to actually create that into cash versus when it's in an index fund, you can instantaneously do that. And so that liquidity profile is just such a multiplier of value that I think gets under considered. And so I think that more people would do well to get clear on, okay, I'm trying to get to $8 million cash. How would I do that? And how could I build and design the business to accomplish my personal financial desires? And then how could I, along with that, align that interest with the rest of the rest of the shareholders and also stakeholders, which I would consider employees, even if they're not shareholders? How do we now try to create the best alignment between all of those interests?
Yeah. I was going to say, like, part of what this makes me think of is like, I've been thinking a lot about this one YouTube creator who makes golf content. He's this like South African guy named, I don't know, Golf Sidekick, I think. But anyway, his point is, if you are not a scratch golfer, why are you shooting for par every time? And I had never thought of that before.
Dude,
And he said,
I think about this all the time,
yeah,
that if I thought about bogey as success, it would completely change the way I played.
yeah, exactly. Exactly. If you shot for bogey, if you shot for double bogey, if I shot for double bogey, I would have the best round of my life by just laying up twice, chopping it down the fairway with a 9 iron, and then taking 3 putts or whatever. And planning to do that will give me the best success, or the best opportunity to get the best score of my life. Right. And so I feel like that's pretty similar here, of like, set the goal. If your goal is to, like, I think a lot of people treat this sort of $1 million or $1 billion exit or whatever as par, when in fact that's not. For you, it might be something else entirely, and you may have a skill set that can actually get you something else. And I think that's kind of what we're talking about here.
That's exactly right. That's a great metaphor, and something that I've tried to internalize. It's funny. I was buying a pickleball paddle yesterday. The school my kids go to, like, a lot of the parents do this. So I went to an event the other day. It's like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I got to figure out what I'm doing here. And I found myself in dialogue with ChatGPT about this, as I often do. And it
Mhm.
kind of came down to this question of, like, what are you trying to do here? Are you trying to, like, play recreationally every Tuesday at the parents' event? Are you trying to, like, and I found myself, like, trying to find the highest end, coolest thing. And
Mhm.
it's sort of the same thing with golf clubs, of like, the worst thing I could do if you're a bad golfer trying to get a little better, is to go buy blades, to buy like the pro golf
Yeah.
clubs. You will get worse. You will be terrible, because it's like mastered or engineered beyond your present capacity. And so it's like trying to get more honest of, like, oh no, like, I'm bad at this and I'm trying to be like competitive amongst a group of 45 to 55-year-old parents once a month. Like, now give me a paddle recommendation. And I think that level of clarity, though, is hard to actually get to.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that makes sense. All right, cool. So let's kind of wrap things up here in terms of like the one takeaway again from this whole conversation about, the 95 and 5%. What do you think is like the one the sort of most important thing that we can take away from this conversation?
Yeah, it's to ask yourself about, I think, that value alignment between are you clear on what you're trying to accomplish? Are you clear on how your business gets there? And then 3 would just be to say, we could help. Like, it's one of the things that we do a lot is to, like you said, whether it's the GQ score or the profit system, these are both tools to say what is likely to occur. And how could we give you a POV on that? And how does that actually relate to enterprise value and the desired outcome that you have, your capacity to produce free cash flow, put it in your pocket? I would love to be in more conversations with brand founders and shareholders about those things of like, how do we get you the actual return on your capital that you want? How do we make this business deliver the financial outcome that you prefer? Set aside the odds of the likelihood of your business being worth X, Y, or Z. How could we improve it? Where do we go from here? And how do we get you what you want out of this thing?
That's right. All right. Yeah. So everybody listening, if you're interested in us working with you on that, whether you're a business that's in the 8-figure range or for the service side, or whether you're interested in just running our diagnostic toolkit, both of those things are available at commonthreadco.com. Just hit learn from us, select the diagnostic toolkit. You can check it out there. Or if you want to work with us, as always, just smash that hire us button and we would love to have that conversation. All right. I think that'll do it for us this week. Everybody take care and we'll talk next time. See ya.